Muhammad Halal Meat, serving the Auckland community for a number of years. When it comes to 100% halal, you know you can trust Muhammad Halal Meat. Visit their retail store, complete with ample parking, at 208 Richardson Road in Mount Roscoe. Muhammad Halal Meat, the name you can trust.
Sandringham Central Dental Care. Dr. Akhtar and Dr. Frank will provide you with the best dental care in Auckland at very affordable prices. Sandringham Central Dental Care, 532 Sandringham Road, Sandringham. Phone 09 815 7205.
No matter how you relate to your car, it is important to care for it in specific ways that will maintain its reliability, preserve its drivability, and protect its retail value. Moon Motors and Tyre Centre, 81 Huia Street, Otahu, Auckland. Phone 09 270 3434.
Thank you for taking the time to talk to us, Rodney.
Pleasure.
I really appreciate it. You described yourself as Parliament's most qualified environmentalist.
Someone else did that, but it's true. Yeah.
I saw it on your website, so I figured it's true.
Mm-hmm.
What members' bills have you put forward, or what bills have you voted for that address the issue of climate change in Parliament?
None. I'm totally opposed to the emissions trading scheme.
Okay.
And my problem with it is that people often then think that you don't know the science or you don't care about the science.
Yeah.
So I actually try and make the point that I've spent years and years as an environmental science, not specialising in climate change, that's true. My fields were botany and zoology, and then environmental science, and then environmental policy, and then environmental economics. But I find people's response often to environmental problems or concerns to be counterproductive to what we're trying to address.
Yeah.
If you think of the environment, one of the key things that we need to do is not waste resources. And so much of government and so much of bad environmental policy is very wasteful. The emissions trading scheme is going to be a huge waste of resources, which, is bad. Second of all, with environmental policy, and we're seeing this again with the emissions trading scheme, is if you're wanting to care for the environment, you want to actually protect people's property rights, because that's what gives us an incentive to care for things, to care for land, to care for trees, to care for habitat. And we come along with government with often the best intentions, but we disrupt that security of property rights, and therefore people start having a shorter time frame. So it's no surprise, for example, that communist countries have a very bad environmental record compared to, say, countries that are capitalist and based on private property. I'd also say this, which people think is odd and counterintuitive, that the more prosperous a country is, the better it is in a position to look after the environment.
Because they can employ more advanced technologies.
Yes, but also people value it. I mean, if you're starving to death or hungry, you don't worry about trees, but when you're well off, you care about trees.
On the balance of evidence, do you think that the changes to the climate are human-induced?
I think that's still an open question. It's not an open question, however, that the models aren't predicting well.
Yeah.
So the models of a sort of correlation between the level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and the world temperature is not holding. So there are other things going on, as you'd expect, sunspot activity and whatnot. So I think it's very much an open question. I think we fall into a lot of mistakes, and we certainly have done this in the environmental field over the years, of taking computer models and their results and thinking that's science.
Yeah.
Because a scientist says it is.
But
they are models.
Shrinking ice, and not all of the predictions are based on computer modelling, or
the predictions are all based on. And if you look at the so-called shrinking ice, parts of it have got smaller over the years, parts of it have got thicker.
Do you roughly agree with the conclusions of the International Panel on Climate Change?
I take that as a starting point because I'm not a scientist, although I have to say, in hearing the submissions from scientists at the select committee on hearing the bill, you'd start to worry about the process, but I say let's take that. My concern in approaching the emissions trading scheme is not as a scientist. My concern is as a politician and a policy maker, and it says, okay, what is the best response for New Zealand to make?
Yeah.
And there I say to myself a couple of simple things. What's our goal? What are we going to achieve? And what's it going to cost? Now what I find is this, I find the goal a bit vague. I don't know what the goal quite is.
For instance, what should we do about emissions from farming, which seem to be quite a large proportion of New Zealand's overall carbon impact?
Well, that's jumping too far ahead, because you could say let's do a lot or let's do nothing. It depends on the context of your overall policy. And here's what I would say about New Zealand. New Zealand is a very small contributor, of course, because we're a small population. But I don't understand why we should race ahead the rest of the world in what we're doing, put massive costs on our economy and our people when no one else might do anything. I mean, where's the sense in that?
So we should wait for someone else to lead? Or?
Sure. We certainly shouldn't be first off the rank on this. Absolutely we shouldn't be. I'm also believe that the emissions trading scheme, I was involved as an academic looking at the quota management scheme, and I know how complicated that was and is. Look, it's easy compared to the emissions trading scheme. Trying to establish a market, if you like, in hot air isn't easy. And so the potential for cock-ups, fraud, no proper result, huge administrative costs is massive. We'll put, for example, we had a submission $50 million on the cost to Air New Zealand domestically.
So does the Act have any policies that address climate change, or just to reinforce property rights? And
the key thing we're responding to on climate change is the government's initiative.
But other than criticising, you may be in a position of power after the next election.
Yeah, well, what I've said is if you're going to do something, and I've said this publicly, you'd actually have a carbon tax. And the reason you'd have a carbon tax is if you want to price greenhouse emissions, you want to do it in a way that's simple, and a tax is simple. You can offset other taxes with the money that the government's making, but more particularly it doesn't set up a costly administrative structure and actually give people a vested interest. So I'm on the record saying if government's going to do something, you'd actually have a carbon tax, not a trading scheme. However, I don't think the case is strong enough that yet we should be doing anything ahead of the rest of the world. The great thing about a tax is it's easier to put on, but it's very easy to take off.
Yeah.
The emissions trading scheme will lock itself in.
Okay. John Key recently described Roger Douglas's approach as a radical far-right agenda. Why do you think he described it that way?
Oh, well, you'd have to ask him. But I suspect is that John Key's argument this election is that he's going to do everything that Helen Clark is doing, plus, and in order to win, if you like, Labour voters. And he sees what ACT is standing for as too much of a change of direction for New Zealand for him to win votes. Whereas what we're doing is we're looking at New Zealand and we're saying we're falling behind the rest of the world economically and socially, and therefore we need to change policies. I don't see why you'd stick with Helen Clark's policies. I think they need changing. I then say, what is it that Roger Douglas or ACT are advocating that is far right? I mean, I think it's quite right that we should have tax cuts. I think it's quite right we should get government spending under control. I think it's quite right that we should be having a scholarship for every child so they can go to the school of their choice. I think it's quite right we should be using the private sector so people can get their operations. I don't see any of that as radical.
Key's trying to distance himself from Douglas and get a firmer grip on the middle ground. Why do you think Douglas is so loathed by quite a big section of the community in New Zealand?
Well, funnily enough, I don't find him loathed. I travel around with Roger. I don't think loathed is the right word. So people admire Roger and respect him, even those people that are opposed to his policies, because they do see him as a politician who stood up for principle and said, here's what we're going to do, and had the guts to do it. What they do, there is an argument about, is about his policies, and at the time they were very controversial.